Welcome to Cybersecurity Today, the weekend edition. I'm your host, Jim Love. This week, we have our regular panel. There's Terry Cutler, ethical hacker and head of Cyology Labs in Montreal. Hello, Terry.
Hello, how are you?
I couldn't be better. How's the weather out in Montreal?
It's getting colder, but yeah, no more plus 31.
Oh, man. And David Shipley, head of Beauceron Security in beautiful downtown Fredericton. Are you actually in downtown, David?
I am once again at the home office in beautiful Fredericton, New Brunswick, and glad to be here.
Wow, yeah, because you're usually traveling these days. I expect you to hear you singing, I've been everywhere, man.
Yeah.
Have to do this because David's not just our cybersecurity expert. He's also our resident arts and culture advisor. And we have a special guest for our panel, Greg Monson, manager of the cyber threat intelligence team at Trustwave. Welcome, Greg.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me on.
And Greg, since you're new to our panel, you get a couple of sentences to tell us what Trustwave is and what you do there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Trustwave is a cybersecurity and managed security services provider. We have both offensive and defensive services in our portfolio. A subset of that is the Trustwave Cyology Labs team, which I'm a part of. The cyber threat intelligence team is a part of. And we do threat research, intelligence, threat hunting, all kinds of stuff across the spectrum, where we're just brought into all the other Trustwave services.
Cool. Okay. Gentlemen, for the format, I'm going to give what we came up with as some of the most interesting stories from the past week in cybersecurity, and we're going to do a little deeper dive into those. We're going to start with this research report, which is how Greg and I met. Trustwave did a report. We have lots of made-up words in technology, but this one's actually pretty good. Malvertising, a new trend using social media advertising as a gateway to distribute information and account stealing malware. Is that correct, Greg?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that we've been seeing a lot of lately.
And can you give us a short summary of that report? I'll post a link to it in the show notes, but if you can give us a short summary, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So the malware Sys 01, it wasn't new when we discovered it, but the variant that we found being utilized on Facebook and some of the other meta platforms had a lot of new capabilities. And it really highlights the shift in TTPs and capabilities from the threat actor behind the malware, such as A/B testing, the different advertisements they're putting out, some of the fallback C2 communications that they've developed. Just overall tracking and effectiveness of the tool was really impressive. And it was new based on when it was first developed. I think it was 2022 when it was first identified. So we really took interest in it, just as these threat actors continue to refine their malware, how to most effectively reach the most people, and then how they leverage it.
And are they getting better at it?
Absolutely. So they utilize, at least to me, one of the most fascinating things is they more or less use their own A/B testing when posting these advertisements. They have a variety of topics such as video games, desktop games, different AI type malvertisements. And then they'll utilize this tag-based system to see which ones are doing best. And obviously the ones that are doing best in a certain region, they'll use those advertisements because the way they leverage it, once impacting an account takeover on Facebook, they'll check if there's money in the advertising budget already filled. They'll see if they got any credentials off the malware that then they can just sell on the dark web. So they've definitely kicked it up a notch in terms of total capability and really just organization.
A question for you, Greg. Is it different from, I'm seeing a lot of either businesses or a lot of individuals that contact us because they received a message on their Facebook business page saying, hey, you violated the terms or whatever, click here to log in or to check your terms, and they go and add their credentials. Next thing you know, their accounts are being taken over. Is that kind of the same kind of process?
That's more of a social engineering phishing tactic. While Malvertising is social engineering, you're not really actively sending it to these targets. You're just putting it into Facebook advertisement system and it'll populate based on your interests or your likes or what have you.
It's interesting, Greg, and I wonder how much we're seeing a rise in the use of alternative communications channels as folks adapt to two different phenomena. One is the cat and mouse game of improved email filters, phishing as a delivery for mechanism for malware as an attachment, or malware as a link is now harder. So they're looking for path of least resistance. Or is it also, this is just a better way to get people at home or on BYOD devices where the enterprise isn't looking, and this is a great place to start. In any sense for sort of the thinking behind this? Is it either or, one replacing the other, both?
Yeah, I don't think this is necessarily going to replace phishing. I think it also, like what you said, path of least resistance, right? Phishing products have gotten better. We utilize MailMarshal for us. It's catching these phishing emails before they can even get to that end user. The threat actor is obviously, if that malware never makes it to the user to even have the possibility of clicking on it, it's a wasted attempt. So by utilizing this, where there's really not too much oversight into what's behind these links, especially when they're on a Google domain or something like that, there's really not too much oversight. So they can just upload the advertisement. Yes, it costs money to host the advertisement, but they're stealing that money anyways. So it really doesn't matter. So they're looking at it as, how do we reach the most people? And obviously, as phishing products improve in detection, they're going to shift their methodologies to a way that's going to have a broader spectrum audience, which would be, in this case, malvertising.
And how well did EDR products, detection products, did actually stop this malware? If it's being delivered to people on a personal basis, then odds are they don't have the bleeding edge enterprise EDR SWAT team kind of approach. But in the cases where it does land an enterprise managed device, does it get picked up?
Yes, absolutely. So our first identification of this was through our threat hunt team. So we worked with them. They found a similar malware called Overseal that we wrote about in the past couple months back. So during the research, we became very informed of kind of the different malvertising options that are even existent, and happened to find this one as well. So we only found it via our threat hunting team. But it's not something that I think most EDRs would pick up at the time of clicking the link. Now, some of the tactics and procedures that are in the malware, the EDR work should pick some of those up. But a lot of these times where it's being hosted on like a Google Drive, for example, it might not pick that up. Now, as a threat hunter, you can be like, why is this person going to a Google Drive with a weird domain? That might set some red flags off. But really, it's that threat hunting component that I think was the most valuable for this specific identification.
We use technology uses full packet capture, a network sensor. So is this malvertising going to beacon out of the network?
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's one of the checks that uses the ping functionality once it's actually on the system to do, that I'm alive check over to the C2. Doesn't read, they'll do the fallback and so on and so forth.
That's what we've noticed. A lot of like companies that rely on log management solutions, they're not seeing these types of beacons going out because they don't have a proper network sensor in place. Mm-hmm. So you're seeing the same thing?
Yeah, same exact thing. It's the sneakiest way, a quick ping packet just out to your C2 to see if it's live, and it's the most lightweight way to do it.
Greg, I just want to back up on this a little bit. I'm seeing a lot of people talking about account takeovers on Facebook. Are they giving up more than their personal credentials and their Facebook credentials? Is there a corporate danger here as well?
Yeah, so I believe there is a level of corporate danger. They're managing their own Facebook account. Like I said, if they have the way Facebook advertising platform is, you load money into the platform. So once these TAs get access to those, they have two options at that point. They can sell the account on the dark web. If it's a well-known company, they probably would lean that way because they could get more money for it. Or they can leverage that to further propagate it, their malware, because if I see an advertisement from a trusted company, I'm more likely to click on it.
What onus, I think, I wonder about these advertising networks, and this goes back to the larger conversation about big tech not taking on the ethical, moral, or legal responsibilities of traditional advertisers in the past, be they television, radio, print, etc., to vet their advertisers to make sure they weren't passing on scams to their customers, etc. And in this case, active threats. And this is interesting to see. I mean, we've seen attacks on ad networks, display ad networks, where at one point, major news media in North America actually was displaying malicious ads on legitimate news articles that if people had engaged with, they could be infected by. And you've got these massive engines and these entirely weird, and you say weird just because the complexity, it just astounds me, of these bidding networks and everything else that happens, but no oversight. There's no accountability for Google, Facebook, etc. to get rid of malvertising. They make money off it. So what's the incentive for them to clean this mess up?
So there's a lot of steps to this, but it really comes down to, these organizations a lot of times, especially Facebook, they make a lot of money through advertising. The cost it would take to overhaul the system to make it more safe, especially with, as we've seen, threat actors change their TTPs. It would be expensive, and it's not an easy fix. It's not just, hey, we're going to vet every link, because some of these they use the DDRs, for example, drop dead resolvers. They use different things beyond that to get through the vet, like the automated vetting process. So it's a tough and difficult problem to solve for sure.
So it's fair to say we're going to have jobs for a long time. Is that what you're trying to tell us?
I would think so. Yeah. Yeah,
All right.
definitely.
Okay. And I've got to leave it panel. You got to leave people with something more than we're going to have jobs for a long time. Well, that's true. Anybody ideas of what people should be doing or they should be thinking about this?
A couple of things. I think cybersecurity awareness education that teaches people about social engineering is more than phishing. So the importance of talking about listening to your gut, if something doesn't feel right, tell somebody, has never been more important, because whether it's email, text, phishing, WhatsApp, Facebook messages, Google advertising, if you think something's off, tell someone. And then from a process standpoint, the interesting question to organizations is, are you resourced? Do you have the capability for people to report things easily when it's a non-enterprise managed device? We rely on the crutch that is the report a phish button for email phishing. And as pointed out, phishing's not dead. It's still very much alive. But what are the other tools and processes you're going to equip your users, particularly in the home, to raise the flag to your team? And what I would suggest is probably my biggest concern. Are you resourced to pay attention to this, particularly where you're not going to have sensors deployed to catch this data on non-enterprise managed devices? And I think for most organizations, that answer is no. And that should wake you up, because criminals go where the hole is. And I think the hole is the home and the personal device.
And let me leave one last thing for our audience. And I'll just say this. If there's somebody out there who thinks they might have got caught in this, don't hide it. And you got a great opportunity. Download a link to the study, go to anybody in your security department or reach out and say, hey, I might have got hit by this. If you hide it, they can't fix it. That's my plea to everybody out there. Next topic. We did a story a week or two ago about a company that got caught with, memory serves me, a training company who hired a North Korean hacker who they eventually caught trying to plant malware in their systems. Now, I thought at the time, interesting story. Then David shifts me an article this week. It says there's 100 hackers that have been tracked that have been hired as remote workers. David?
So this actually is a really interesting follow-on to KnowBe4's self-disclosure of this hiring of a North Korean hacker. For those not familiar, North Korea, as part of its revenue generating strategy, is farming out its citizens to work. And in some cases, they actually do legitimate work in coding, remote work jobs, etc., to generate much needed cash for the regime, particularly for its nuclear weapons program, which is just absolutely awful. So in this case, we originally learned that before got ahead of the story, said, listen, this happened to us, got by our processes. We shipped the laptop. The laptop went to this drop ship location where someone was essentially running a farm for remote workers. And that individual now has likely been indicted by the U.S. Department of Justice for facilitating sanctions evasion and other things. So in this case, what was interesting with the KnowBe4 story is this couple things. They mentioned they did multiple interviews. And I'm still trying to understand how that interview process actually worked, because they said the person made some changes to a legitimate ID, took a stolen ID and made it adapted a bit. But how did they get by the interviews? Did they just do on the phone, no video? I want to still know more about that vetting process for this. And then they did give compliments at the time. They said their EDR tool and their SOC detected this. Turned out, looks like that may have been CrowdStrike, because this is CrowdStrike's annual report. Hey, just remember, before the entire mess a couple weeks ago, they were the world's largest and enterprise EDR maker, top of the Gartner Magic Quadrant, all that good stuff. I think some of the good work that CrowdStrike does in the leading research has been blown away by this massive sort of store. But what they highlighted in this annual report was 100 mostly US-based companies were part of this campaign. And because they could see across enterprises, they could see the common TTPs and tooling and activities, which was really interesting. So I found this entire story fascinating, and it should be terrifying, because imagine if they were just smarter or slower. And also, they're probably not the only ones using this remote worker vulnerability to get themselves inside organizations. They just got caught doing it. And they had the largest, most organized campaign caught to date. And I think that raises really interesting questions about process. How are you vetting employees? How are you making sure? What are the technical controls at depth? And I think that's an important lesson for organizations, particularly those that are seeking out remote workers to get lowest cost. And not only do you have this sort of threat of folks outsourcing to North Korea intentionally or being North Korean agents, you also have remote workers now who are working multiple jobs concurrently, who are actually subcontracting without your knowledge. And are they accidentally subcontracting out to a North Korean? So you've got this fourth party chain of risk on this. So overall, I thought it was interesting. It explains a little bit why KnowBe4 may have wanted to get ahead of this story between the indictments and what may come through that court process and this annual report. This was coming. They certainly got a media wave for it, and good kudos for being transparent about it. I would love to see more from them explaining how their process gaps actually failed, not just the technology success of detecting it, but tell me more about exactly how the gaps were exploited.
Yeah, there was some other things too. You brought up a couple of great points. And I think some technologies could have picked some of these threats up. For example, maybe the user's doing suspicious activity. Fine, EDR should pick that up. But what about if you're having multiple logins from different IP addresses at the same time, especially on the cloud side? Your network sensor should have picked this up. Or if you see employees, all of a sudden they're working 22-hour shifts for a long period of time, that should be weird activity.
Yeah.
So in fairness to the cleverness of this, what the attackers were doing was they were using the company issued devices. But the key part was they had remote management tools installed on those devices. So essentially the laptop became a proxy that you proxied into. So unless you've got really good sensor telemetry, which in this case, fortunately they did, a remote management tool has been installed in this. That's weird. And then figuring out this thing is a gateway to all kinds of bad. Now, we don't often talk about operational security and OPSEC wins. We usually laugh about OPSEC fails by criminals, but on an OPSEC win, they knew to stay within time of day. So to Sherry's point, like if you see outside of bound normal to working hours, but I would also suggest engineers are funny. Like sometimes they get these inspiration spurts. They wake up, they go at something that little coding part that wasn't working in their head. They wake up at 2 a.m. That cartoon sometimes is real and figured out the
Greg.
problem.
That's Greg right there. He does that.
Yep. Greg's sitting there. Yep. Got my Jolt Cola or what is, I never know what people are drinking, but yeah. Any comments on that, Greg, yourself?
Yeah, I think expand it would sometimes, like in this case, the vetting process fails. So I think it really highlights the importance of an insider threat program at your organization. Threats don't end just on the external side of your network. There are malicious actors that are actively trying to get access to company resources any way they possibly can. So having an insider threat program in place is, I think, just as important as the vetting process can be of the employees that you're bringing on, because you need to have established processes in place in the event that this does happen, because you don't want to learn on the fly. That's the worst time to learn or implement, processes. Really looking at how would we respond if someone had an RMM on an admin level host. How do we do this? If we see someone exfiltrating a terabyte worth of data to some Google Drive, what's our processes? These should all be documented and easily followable.
And this isn't just a big company thing. I will tell you, David, you drove me crazy with this, popping this story out. And I thought about the earlier one that I'd seen, but I hired a guy last week to do some work for me. And I'm sitting there going, how do I know he's really real? And in a small business, let's face it. And I could trace it back and I went, okay, now I know the person who introduced me. I know the person who referred. I can check back the company and all that stuff. So now I'm frantically going back and saying, I hired somebody to do a simple job for me, but they're going to be in our network. How do I, as a relatively small business, track that? You almost got a phone call from me, but I figured it out myself. So there you go.
No, these are really challenging times. And even if I go a layer harder, like right now, it's incredibly challenging to do hiring, even if it's going to be a job hybrid or in person when you have new citizens. How do you do thorough background checks based on sort of geopolitics? And how does that influence your hiring practices and policies and other things? And even government agencies don't have the resources to keep up with their intelligence and background and clearance processes are broken. we didn't have clearance processes properly really thought of in the private sector that can give you that assurance. Our organization does criminal background checks, does obviously very thorough job on the reference checks. By the way, key lesson from the know before hire, do not do email references. Man, don't do that. Just, you got to spend the time. You got to get on the phone, ideally video if you can, and do those reference checks on folks. But this is getting harder.
Well, the whole thing, right? Hire fast. Was it hire slow, fire fast?
Yep. Yeah. And I think this is going to be an interesting challenge. And I think we have this prisoner swap, but I'll leave at this point. This big thing happening in the States with the prisoner swap with Russia. And you've got these long-term agents being returned to Russia whose kids didn't even know they were Russian, right? What happens when someone goes, you know what? It is worth us to play the long game in a global cloud provider. We're going to sit there for 10 friggin' years until we're actually ready to do this. And hopefully they're thinking about the fact that level of nation state long-term investment, AKA they can pay the salary to play the long game. The thing about the know before thing that I think was really friggin' lucky for them was how in a rush this threat actor was. He gets the laptop, and one of the first things to do as a new hire, they start screwing around with malware. Like, whoa. Imagine if he just played this out over 6 months. What a different story that might have been.
Would have been a terrible story. Yeah. The last thing for me, and I'll toss it out there, was one of the reasons that gave me confidence. I actually worked with the person for the first little while on a problem. And that to me, video on, talking about problems, doing a little bit of spitballing, talking, gave me a greater degree of confidence. But you still scared me, David. But kudos. That's one in a row for CrowdStrike. We had a good message for CrowdStrike. I'm proud of y'all in there because they took a beating and they continue to take a beating. Last week, we talked about Delta launching a lawsuit against CrowdStrike, and they were pretty outraged. And Delta claimed to have lost $500 million, I think it was. Their reputation was damaged, and they were blaming CrowdStrike for giving them untested software. And they hired a pit bull of an attorney and a big law firm to sue. The worm turned a little bit there. Terry, you want to give us a bit on that?
Yep. So yeah, again, like you mentioned, Delta accused them of providing them untested software and how they're negligent and all these kind of things. But what was really interesting is that they teamed up with Microsoft, and it revealed that Delta had ignored their CEO, right? They offered assistance during the crisis, and this collaboration with CrowdStrike and Microsoft, it would have maybe helped further along like the recuperation and stuff like this. But so just the partnering up with Microsoft and CrowdStrike threw a wrench into this whole lawsuit.
Yeah, but both of the responses from CrowdStrike's and Microsoft lawyers were like on the edge of salty, right? Like, they were not messing around. And I think it was CrowdStrike and maybe Microsoft's lawyers both pointed out, hey, you weren't the only airline to use Windows environment and CrowdStrike, but you were the only one that went through this much pain. Perhaps there's something more on that. The other quick thoughts that pass my mind is, number one, that wasn't a CEO level email that they cited where some unfortunate Delta IT manager, employee, somebody said to somebody else, hey, we're good for now, we're good, etc. Whoever that person is, oof, I would not want to be that person on the radar with that email cited by the lawyer. Oh, that's no good. So that's one that's interesting. But everything we discussed in a show, the last show, the show before, where we said, here's all the things that are going to get smattered against the wall that were like entirely foreseeable, were exactly what we saw in the letters.
Yeah. And for everybody, that poor person who said, we're doing fine. It's the old story. If you're in cybersecurity and there's a crisis and you're in a room and you can't see the scapegoat, you're it. Thank God, Satya Nadella wrote to the CEO of Delta. And I got to tell you, if Satya writes an email to me, I'm going to get back to him right away.
I'm going to take that call.
Yeah. And bad PR, he's on his way to the Olympics. Leave the guy who answered the email alone right now. Go check out your CEO because he's got some splaining to do as well.
But we see this often too. I'm sure Greg can relate. We'll come across an IT guy that we want to offer our cybersecurity services to. And they're like, no, we're good. We don't need any help. But yet we'll run an attack surface report on them, and which pulls the information out of Shodan, and it's freaking beat red. Like I got a sunburn from the report. I'm like, but if you're okay, why is there all this stuff exposed? Like, I'm here to help you. I'm not here to take your job or anything. But if you say you're okay, but you're not, like, if something happens to your company, this IT guy is going to get fired. He's going to get another job, but the CEO is going to be in charge of cleaning up this mess. That's going to cost him a fortune. I'm not sure, Greg, are you seeing something similar?
Yeah, definitely. You can inform them and lead them to water, if you will. Hey, there's issues here where there's clear issues. If I can find them an adversary that's actually targeting you, we'll even find more when I'm just impacting doing some of this stuff. If you say you're okay, hey, that's your neck at the end of the day, not mine. I can only, help you so much, inform you, say, hey, this is what I would do. This is how I remediate. These are the steps that you would take. But at the end of the day, that's your environment, your enterprise environment. I'm just an MSSP guy, right?
And this is the Yozerian catch-22 position of that IT worker. I just want to take a sympathetic nod. So odds are, based on my career arc and experience, when they got in there, Terry, they were fired up as we are. They wanted to fix all the things. They had all the results. They had the receipts. They had the plan. And they went to the business leaders. And the business leaders said... And so here's us eager super vendors, services, professional services, software. We're like that kid in Up, right? Knocking on the door. I was like, we need our badge, right? There was a famous CISO advertising video that I thought was funny related to this, just brought this back to mind. And we're all Russell and we're all just super enthusiastic and we want to walk them across. And they're like, no, I'm good. I don't need this right now. I can't, because why? And the funny part is how quickly the CEOs turn. And, Jim, you mentioned this point, the scapegoat that becomes this. And it's interesting. And I don't think this is a problem we fix until there's better accountability on leadership for the risk appetite decisions that are actually made. And this gets to the question of architecture. I guess props to the US airline that was still running Windows 3.1. They didn't have this problem. So
it's coming back, David, any day now.
Yeah. But all that to say is we are an industry that puts people in impossible position and turn on them so fast. And and that's why we have the turnover. That's why we have the structural issues we have in this industry, is that the wrong people are always held accountable for decisions that others make.
And the lesson, if you're a vendor in this, and you call up and there's something wrong. And Terry, you're going to give David a competition on our Entertainer of the Week award. Boy, if the report gives you a sunburn, then escalate, leave something there, write to somebody more senior and say, hey, I don't think you're okay.
And I'll add this, is that there's an expression that I once heard is even a prophet or the Messiah himself, Jesus, was just a carpenter in Nazareth. And oftentimes in an organization, the IT person is just seen as, yeah, we've heard from David. Use Terry when that opportunity presents itself. You can make Terry, and he's happy to do it, the boogeyman. Then you can say, listen, man, this guy is a national level expert. Here's a report. It's not just me saying this. It's the expert. And that's the one advantage, is that it's not that we come in as vendors or service providers and are going to tell your leaders different things than you're saying. You're good at your job, and we acknowledge that. It's that a different voice saying that can sometimes be the difference that changes the channel and gets budget. So to add to that point, to the Terry side, is, yeah, we are here to help you. And how can you enable us to do that?
Or if we're going down the religious route, I'll go amen. Because in cybersecurity, in IT in general, when I started out 100 years ago, we relied on vendors for information. They were friendly. They informed us. We counted on them. And as a matter of fact, I'd use that more than once to bring somebody in to get a message across. And I once asked the person, I said, how can you get this message across to the management? And I've been trying for a year. He said, the person who flies the furthest is the expert. And so making use of vendors, making use of the talent there has been something we used to do. We somehow got off that track. We somehow got really suspicious about the people we're working with. And we turn down expertise. You're right. Somebody phones you, Terry or you or David phone me for something. And yes, you've got a product or a service, or Greg, you've got a product or service, but you're really knowledgeable at what you do. I'm going to suck up all the knowledge I can from you. And many times it's free.
So not just that, we're not going to just tell you and scare you. We're actually going to show you real facts. Look, here's your password leaked on the dark web. Here's your attack surface. Here's all the red happening in your organization because we ran a quick audit on you. There's all kinds of stuff that we can show, like value up front, no cost, no contract, no money, like just to show proof that we can help you gain your trust.
And I think in some ways, the IT professional industry can behave like a middle-aged dad on the 1950s era road trip, right? Like, I got the map. You know what I'm doing. All right. It's not my first time. My dad drove this. I've driven this. I'm okay. I don't need your fancy GPS. Yeah. We gotta learn to ask for help. Or my own development team, when I'm like, hey, did you guys read the documentation about X, Y, and Z? And like, no, we want to figure this out. Read documentation. Talk to the experts.
Yeah. You can always say no if they say, do you want to buy something? Really easy. No, thanks. But I appreciate your help. I think we got time for one more story. Darktrace researchers reported that 17.8 million 17.8 million phishing emails were detected between December 2023 and July 2024. Anybody got any comments on that?
So just one of the interesting things about the report was they said that there was up to 50% bypass rate on email security filters. Up to 1 out of every 2 phishes sent by all your filters to drop into the user inbox. And we've seen the same concept, which we've started talking about. We call it the phishing leakage rate. And there's actually a way to calculate this. I'm going to share this. Speaking of sharing expertise for free from a vendor, here's the formula. So if you look at your real phish reporting rate in your organization, and you should be tracking that. If you don't have a process that, you've got big issues. Because real phishes get by your email filters. By the way, every email filter, I'm not going to slam any given vendor, has a leakage rate. Somewhere between 5% and as high as 50% based on what Darktrace is reporting. So you look at the real stuff that got reported in a month. Then you look at your phishing simulation report rate. And if you've got a 50% report rate for your phishing simulations, then that number that you have of real phishes is probably only 50% of the real ones that get delivered. And that actually gives you a leakage rate. That number can then be looked at in context against the total number of emails that were stopped. So what does this look like in practice? Let's take Beauceron. So we have 150 real phishes that were stopped by Microsoft. And then we have 50 that were reported by employees that got by. And let's say, for the sake of argument, we've got a 90% report rate. So we actually had 55 that got delivered. So the total number of phishes my organization dealt with was 205. Of which Microsoft stopped 150. So that gives me now a leakage rate of around 25%. So now I know, and this leakage rate fluctuates. It's very seasonal. New tactics, new tools, new domains. There's a shift. It's a cat and mouse in a very cyclical game. So this is a really important measurement point, and it ties in security awareness. Why is it important to get people to report phishes? Why is it important to educate people? Because phishes are going to get by filters. So reducing that rate and acknowledging that. And because Darktrace isn't an email filter vendor, this is a really good sort of non-biased perspective on this. And it's really good to take that leakage rate and look back at your SLAs and your technology controls and hold your vendors accountable if they're over-promising and under-delivering.
I used to sleep better at night till I met you, David. I bought a phishing filter, and then I'm sitting there. Oh yeah, there's leakage in that. Greg, I saw you. Never mind my sleeping at night. I saw you nodding there, Greg. Just jump in.
And I expect that number to continue to grow, whether the leakage is 1%, 10%, whatever it is. It's very cheap to do. Threat actors will continue to just fire as many phishing emails as they can. The methodology is incredibly simple to do whatever they want, whether it's harvesting credentials, somehow getting someone to download a loader malware. Just on the ease of entry into that attack vector, it will continue to grow. And the speed in which these phishing emails can hit people's inboxes is so quick. There's no reason for them not to do it.
And we're seeing more attacks now on legitimate companies that are getting hacked into, and they're being used as a jump point to attack another company. So the emails are automatically legit. Even not spam, it's legit. People are going to click on the links they're not supposed to, log in, give their credentials away, and they're going to get popped.
Yeah. And an example of that, like one of the interesting things we saw last summer, and we're still seeing examples of, is organization gets hit. Then they use Microsoft's encrypted messages feature called Purview to send that to another trusted part of the supply chain. So it gets delivered from a Microsoft environment legit to another Microsoft environment legit, bypass all the filters. You can't see the malware or the malicious link that's going to be part of the final end stages of the payload until you actually access the message, load it in Purview, and then all of a sudden there's the weaponized link in that system. And then you're back to praying EDR and other things are going to kick in and stop it. So it continues to be, phishing's not going away, but this myth of AI and the perfect email filter, if I could just bury that. And if I could layer a little bit of spiciness on that comment, we also have the fact that sometimes email filter makers make mistakes. And so there's an interesting story a couple weeks ago where one of the largest, Proofpoint, had an error in how it trusted Microsoft Office 365 configured email domains. And so it was stamping a bunch of phishing emails impersonating Disney, IBM, and others as passing DMARC, DKIM, SPF on that side. So they were getting by the email filters because of a flaw in how that system was set up. And that only existed for 6 months plus. And it was researchers who discovered the error in that. So when you've got these large global vendors that are responsible for, I think the latest brag point at Black Hat is 80% of the Fortune 100. If they make a mistake, it creates a huge systemic risk.
And on that happy note, we have to wrap it up. But something tells me you're right, David. This isn't going to go away anytime soon. I'm actually halfway thinking about doing a future show on phishing, or maybe we talked about social engineering and all of that, because I think this is, I'd like to do a deeper dive into this at one point. We'll talk about that. I'll leave that with our audience. If this is a topic that interests you, or if you want us to do a deeper dive, or if there's something else, leave us some comments with the show at editorial@technewsday.ca. And we'll consider that as part of the content. We also take, if you want to toss in your idea for a story of the week that we should be covering with the panel, just let me know. Editorial@technewsday.ca. Thanks to the panel for your insights. Terry Cutler of Cyology Labs, always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you for having me again.
David Shipley of Beauceron Security.
Thanks for having me. And Greg, it was great to meet you, and I loved learning from your research.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Greg Monson from Trustwave. Thanks, Greg.
Yep, thank you.
We'll put a link to the study with the show notes on our site at technewsday.ca or .com. And David, if you've got some more information on leakage, I think if you've got something to point us at, I'll put a link in. The show notes for the weekend shows are not big. If you want the notes, listen to the show. But I'll post those notes with some links for you. And you can also find this on your YouTube video, which I will post sometime this weekend as well. Thanks to our panel, and thanks to you, our listeners, for spending part of your weekend with us. I'll be back with the cybersecurity news stories on Monday morning. I'm your host, Jim Love. Have a great weekend.